Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. We're back from our road trip, and we're back in the studio, so we don't have all the very noisy stuff in the background, at least not as much anyway.
No, but I think we're all very droopy from 5 days or 6 days, I guess it was, of nonstop fun and relaxation and all of that. So I can't believe we're even doing this, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's right. And we might possibly have had a glass of wine before too.
Yeah. So this might have a different
kind of
tone than normal.
In the travel
less
mode, still a little bit.
Yeah.
But it is Freaky Friday. We almost forgot that somehow. Being on the road, that's the way it is. You kind of lose track of what day it is and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but it is still Freaky Friday, and we had a little bit of a Freaky Wednesday. We happened to be in St. Augustine, which is the oldest continuously occupied city in the entire Americas.
And what's freakier in a good way is Des is back with us here.
Hey, Des.
Just kidding. Hi, it's good to be back.
You're in full corporal.
Yes.
You're giving everybody a clue about what we're going to talk about.
They kicked me out of whatever afterlife I was in and
They said,
you
go back and try again.
Yeah. Good luck to you. Come back when you're ready.
Good luck, sucker.
Yeah.
So you did a ghost tour, St. Augustine?
No, we didn't. The only time we kind of almost did is that we were trailing, behind an actual ghost tour that people paid to be on. And cheating a little bit, kind of listening.
Yeah, but not deliberately. We're just slow walkers. And the people we were with were kind of ahead of us. But then when they heard all of this going on over by the graveyards.
So that's the connection from us traveling and talking about ghosts on Freaky Friday.
I actually was interviewed to be a possible tour guide for a ghost tour in St. Augustine.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. You did tell us that, didn't you?
Right.
Yeah, so they asked me a bunch of questions, and I'll try to remember what they were. But they did like it was some kind of question. If somebody on your tour came up to you and said, "I don't believe in ghosts," what would you say to them?
And you said what?
Am I real? I think that was my answer.
Leaving them
I'm surprised you didn't get the job.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
I think I probably scared the person who was hiring. They're probably like, "Oh,
well, that's
too
too
good. Want to hire a real ghost."
That answer was a little too good.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe off-putting.
So what did you hear when you were following
I don't know. That's a number of years ago. But, some history of it. Of course, they got to go by the cemetery, which is right close to the
that cemetery is spooky just to look at it.
Well, St. Augustine, is that not the oldest city in the, whatever we are, United States?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It definitely is. Probably the whole America.
I forgot where we lived.
It's Friday. You can get away with a lot on Friday. Just looking into those cemeteries, especially at dusk or just at dark, I'm not interested in cutting through there, even as a shortcut. I'll take the long way around every time.
It's a long history of such things. And there was one of those popular, like, ghost hunter shows or something where they spend a night in, and they did that in the Castillo, the big fort there right on the water and right close to downtown St. Augustine,
supposedly
Florida.
Haunted by the wife of one of the captains, I believe.
Oh, okay. Tell us. I didn't know that.
I don't know all the details. All I know is that she was supposedly having an affair on the side, and I don't know what the circumstances of her demise was, but apparently she haunts the place, and that there are people who can smell her perfume. And
was it nice?
Sometimes shadowy images. I don't know. How would I know that? Was it nice? No, just, I don't know. Have you ever been in a place where all of a sudden you
smell perfume? Yeah, the mall.
Smell.
No.
When you're getting your samples.
Yeah. Is this place haunted?
One time I had an experience. It wasn't ghostly or
Haunted
anything
by
like
perfume.
that. But
That's not too bad, though.
I was in a shop in Europe, and it was not long after my father had passed away. And I was in a shop, and I smelled his pipe tobacco on it must have been on another, customer in the store. But oh my goodness, did that have a powerful effect on me?
Something similar also in Key West, wasn't it?
Oh, in Key West one
Oh.
time. We were walking around, our kids were young, and there was a kind of a cool shop. They had handmade jewelry and vintage clothes and things like that. This was a while ago. I've always been into that sort of thing. And I went to go in the store, and there was this overwhelming feeling that I got not to go in that store. And I stood there because, looking at the things that were in the window was really attractive, and I
sense of
really wanted to
foreboding?
go in there. Yes, very much so. And so I tried to override it with my good sense, but I couldn't. In the end, I took a couple of steps closer to, there was two doorways, an outer and an inner, presumably to keep the cool inside the main room. But I just couldn't override that feeling, and so I turned around and left. And I've never found out why, what was the big deal in that specific place. But I do know I get hunches about places and people sometimes, and just the level of discomfort and your word is good, foreboding. Not a place that I should be. And so I usually go with my gut. I think people should. If you get a feeling like that you shouldn't be somewhere or you shouldn't continue on a track that you're on, listen to that. Go with that, because at the end of the day, if you're wrong, so what? But if you're right, you're right.
And it's interesting that it seems like maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm wrong, so what? But it seems like in the past it used to be like people were like afraid of haunted places and they would avoid them and stuff. But now it's like a tourist thing. It's like, ooh, I want to stay in that hotel because it's haunted. They say it's haunted.
Yeah.
And I think the people that are trying to get tourism going and everything, they
capitalize on
do.
that,
I was going
don't
to say
they?
prey on that, but I didn't.
No,
That's
they do
harsh.
capitalize on it. For me, I might be willing to do something like that. Maybe not stay all night, but I might be willing to stay there late as long as I'm not tucked in bed and vulnerable. That for me is a cutoff. Also as a cutoff is, have any of the reported ghosts that are haunting these places, do they harm people? Are they scratching people up? Because I know, certainly in Scotland, there's a number of castles and things that people can go and stay at. And
They get attacked?
yeah.
Oh, my.
They come out of there, they're all scratched up. Other situations, they've been burned, like with cigarettes or cigars or something like that.
But breakfast is free.
Not for me. I'm out of there, babe.
Yeah, actually, at Edinburgh, you're talking about, and there's some sort of underground, I don't know what you call them. But,
Like a crypt kind of thing, or a...
Maybe. I'm not sure. But
A lot of them have
that's where
tunnels underground for
Edinburgh is
escapes.
one of the most haunted cities in the world, apparently.
I bet you Paris is pretty haunted too, huh?
No, I mean,
No?
you don't feel that, but they did have the I'd say caverns, but there's something like that.
Catacombs.
Catacombs, that's what it was, yeah.
Under Notre Dame.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of those places, you just get this feeling where it's more than the usual everyday experience. You just feel that there's something more, a dimension more.
And like with these haunted hotels and different things, well, like if you're going to stay in a cemetery, you're anticipating that kind of thing. So maybe your
Exactly.
mind kind of helps
I
set
think
the
that's
mood.
true.
Isn't that like when they go to those cemeteries and they use tape recorders or
EVP.
what is EVP?
Well, I think they call it electronic voice phenomenon, but I think it's misnamed.
What do you think it should be?
I think it should be electromagnetic voice phenomenon.
not
So
electronic.
it's not just sound. Is it like just
It's
energy?
voices.
Just
Yeah.
all
It's
kinds of.
Actual-
They, especially on tape, the old style magnetic tape, like cassette tapes and stuff like that. And if you go back further, they used to record on a wire way back to Edison. In fact, Edison had this idea, I think, originally. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Thomas Edison that had this concept that that there might be some sort of otherworldly energy that would be picked up on his wire recorder. And I don't think there's a lot of information about that beyond that, but he had a high interest in the whole thing.
Well, if I understand correctly, this EVP, electronic voice, what is that? Phenomenon, is that basically they tape, sometimes they ask questions, specific questions, and in the moment as they're taping, it appears that nothing is happening.
Right.
And it isn't until they go back and they listen to the
tape.
playback
Yeah.
on these recordings. We had a friend who actually, his sister and brother-in-law and he...
Yes, they were
took
very much into that. Yeah.
Oh, they were. They took a tape recording up near Rochester, New York, and they took a tape recorder into a cemetery, and they basically were just walking down I call them avenues, but the aisles of the cemetery, and reading the names of the headstones, the names that were on the headstones. And, it was a little creepy, they said, but, nothing major.
Well, I think they didn't say it out loud on the tape, so you have to roll the tape, yes, if you're recording. A lot of those, like the early Sony Walkman, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I'm dating myself, cassette recorder and player.
So they would ask a question, but not get an answer.
I think that's what it was. They
What
were
they
just reading the names off the headstone, and from what I understand, what I recall, when they played it back, I'm going to use an example. They say, "Oh, Mary Smith," and then the next headstone is.
No, I don't think they were saying that.
I think it was first. The first one was like Bill Smith, and then the next one was Mary Smith. And when they played it back,
I'm not Mary.
no, it said
Like that, yeah.
Mother. Do you remember that, Dave?
I don't. I remember it a little bit differently. I think they were reading them silently with, looking at them in their mind, right? And then they said something like, "What's your name?"
No, I think
What's your
I think
name?
it was. I'm sure it was.
There was one thing that
Mother.
the answer was mother. Yes, that's right.
And so I think what it was I don't know that they asked a specific question about the relationship between Mary Smith and Bill Smith, but when they did the playback, it said mother. And apparently there have been a number of scientists. There was a guy called Friedrich Jorgensen.
Oh yeah, that's
And,
right. He's like the
his-
father of all this, I think.
His-
Consider him.
his
Although Edison
research-
maybe should have been.
There was another guy before him who also was doing a lot of research. And both Jorgensen and his predecessor, when they were doing these EVP experiences and experiments, they both had their mother's voice in a Class A response. So apparently with EVP, they classed them Class A, Class B, Class C, with Class A being the loudest and most clear,
Yeah.
then followed by B, a little less, and then Class C is more difficult to decipher. Sometimes it's not in the same language that the experimenters expect, and a lot of times there's a lot of other extraneous noise. But both Jorgensen and I forget the guy's name who was his predecessor, both of them had their mother. And what was interesting is the one scientist, his mother spoke to him using his childhood nickname, which would be difficult to fake, because you don't really write that down. A grown man doesn't really recall that or allow people to continue calling him unless it's some cool nickname. But they both, the mothers apparently had identified themselves as such, and we are here. And one of the things that was kind of interesting is saying, "We are watching. We are listening.
Was that the one where they were trying to the whole idea? Here's the one thing: if somebody goes out there with a recorder and wanting to find something, but this one example, that was not what they were after. They were they took a reel-to-reel wire recorder. So this is very old, into an abbey or something, and they wanted to record the Gregorian chants.
Yeah, I think that's it.
And I think that's the one. And what was it? I think you read that actually more recently than I did. The wire kept breaking or something.
Yeah.
And they had to stop down and repair, rewind the wire and then continue to record, and 2 or 3 times or whatever. And whoever was doing the recording, probably one of the other friars or something, and sort of called out to his dead father to, please help us.
Please help me, Dad.
And then they finished the Gregorian chants, and when they played it back, they got a response from his father.
And very favorable, of course. I will help you.
Your story reminds me of Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini story where you said in your example that they got back a childhood nickname that was very specific, right? Well, Houdini became disillusioned with the thoughts of the afterlife and all the seances and stuff, and he tried to reach his mother. And he participated in a seance to contact his mother. And what do you call the person who leads the seance, or the medium or whatever?
Yeah.
And she said, I have your mother here, and I have a message from your mother. And she says, I'm fine, Harry, and all this stuff. Well, Harry was his stage name. His real name was Eric. So he became disillusioned with the whole idea of the afterlife and ghosts and things.
Because the medium didn't recognize that his mother would never have called him Harry.
And someone who's a magician is inherently skeptical of tricks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they text one to no one, right?
Yeah. So, but what we're talking about with ghosts and scientific equipment, I think a lot of people, it's the story of, it's what Ghostbusters is based on. These are scientists who use their knowledge of whatever, their technical stuff and technical knowledge, scientific knowledge, to hunt and locate and trap ghosts and everything like that, right? So it's science being used in relation to spiritual beings or whatever. So that's the question: is how do you, if it's not if this stuff isn't a hoax, how do you explain EVPs working scientifically with what energy this is that are ghosts? Are ghosts what we think they are?
Well, the Christian Bible does not really reference ghosts. There is one reference where Saul went to consult the witch of Endor. And he wanted to talk, I believe, to his father or to someone. And so that is really the only reference in the Christian Bible about talking to the spirits of the dead. Now, in the Christian Bible, they don't recognize like ghosts as we think of ghosts.
Jesus wouldn't be a ghost because he was brought back to life, or is he a spirit?
He was brought back to life, physical life.
Okay.
And then he ascended into heaven in full bodily form. So in terms of the Christian Bible, anything that is a spiritual entity is just that. It's either an angel or a demon or a spirit. When we talk about the Holy Spirit, we're not really talking about a ghost. What we're talking about is a full entity, a full being with a separate psyche that is part of the Trinity, that it is an equal member of the Trinity.
The Holy Ghost.
Also a male, the Holy Ghost. Also a male aspect. It's more correct to call it probably the Holy Spirit. And this spirit is, in terms of lore, in terms of iconography, if you see a dove representation. That's an indication of the Holy Spirit, also known as the Holy Ghost. Also a flame, if you remember the Pentecost stories with the flame, really the flame of knowledge and of fervor or faith. That's an indication of the Holy Spirit.
That's interesting.
Equal with the Holy Father and with Jesus the Son.
When you think of fire, you think about how kind of magical fire is. It's like it's an energy, it's a force that's escaping an object.
Right. And an ignition of something. You know,
Yeah.
if you've ever struggled to make your campfire or to cook your burgers, you know that wonderful feeling when you finally catch fire. And I think in a spiritual sense,
You mean the wood?
the wood,
Not you.
not yourself, but when your
this is great.
efforts, when your efforts finally produce fruit,
My hair.
and that is certainly part of it. And again, another male aspect of the Christian God. So some people in modern times try to talk about it as a female influence, but there's no record of that in the Christian Bible.
Well, that's not surprising.
So we have that. We have the idea of angels and demons, and we also have pretty much the directive that Christians are not encouraged to seek out the spirits of their dead, the human dead.
I didn't know that.
Because
Really?
they're not encouraged to do that, because it is believed that those spirits are asleep awaiting judgment. And so they have nothing to say to help a spirit. Now, I know we have a lot of lore about wakes and funerals and those kinds of things. One of the reasons is certainly an Irish custom why they would sit up all night with a corpse. And basically they surrounded that corpse and kept a well, you can call it a vigil. It could be convivial in terms of they might have been passing around some liquid spirits, but they did that so that corpse could not be indwelled by evil spirits.
And why is it called awake?
Because you stay awake while you're doing it. You don't sleep next to that corpse.
There's
Your
something-
job is to continuously monitor the situation.
And isn't there some connection with the term living room?
Well, yeah, because they used to lay people out. You know, I was looking at, I don't know, I guess I have a couple of books here about antique customs, and I say antique rather than ancient customs for dealing with dead corpses, that sort of thing. Only two. It's not a fascination of mine or anything that I spend a great deal of time on. But they always laid them out at home, and they used to have rooms in the house that were sort of reserved for those kinds of uses, like parlors and that sort of thing.
And then
Then
the
that's-
living room was when it was the place where the people could go where the corpse wasn't being presented, right?
Yeah, that's right. So those parlors, I know my parents always talked about going over to the funeral parlor to pay their last respects
For
to
some tea.
some loved
Yeah.
person or that.
What?
But
what
I
do
was going to tell
oh,
you.
go
Let
ahead.
me finish my story. Families had these folding tables that they would fold out. The legs would come down, and they could be anchored down, and they would cover them with an appropriate cloth. And the corpse of their loved one would be stretched out on that, you know, and all of this.
They just put them on a table?
On these folding tables.
Oh.
I don't know how much embalming went on. I don't know. But in antique times, that's what they did. Well, I was online. I was searching for a folding table. And there was one that came up that I looked at that, and it looked strangely like one that, you know, people would be laying out their
Good for
family
birthday
members.
parties and displaying a corpse.
I know. So I steered clear of that, but it was interesting to me that popped up, because I'm absolutely certain the way that listing was written, I don't believe the lister had any idea what that old table was probably used for. And I almost wrote him a little note and said, you might want to ask around about what the original use of that old table was. But I didn't. I figured, mind your own business, old lady.
I want to ask you quickly if you knew anything about. I don't want to get too far off the topic here, but what about putting coins on a corpse's eyes?
Well, for one thing,
And a headstone was supposed to keep them from coming back to life, right?
Back to life, that's right. Some early graves, the person is actually shackled. And I think that would be indicative of that this was a problematic personality in life that people might have thought was possessed in some way. And so a lot of times if a corpse is exhumed later on, during some sort of mall development or, road work or something like that, and they're found with iron chains on them, they need to be reburied quickly because people feel uncomfortable with all of that.
And that I guess there are like lots of different categories of ghosts, right? Like a poltergeist is something that will follow you around.
Yeah.
So I don't know all the.
When I was in college, they had a course. It was classified as religion and I think also, theology. And it also had some psychology aspects to it. And the professor that taught it was a Catholic priest. And I remember going in, I think I was a sophomore in college, probably 19, 18 years old, something like that. And he kept the front row of seats open. No, none of the, students were allowed to sit in that row. And he claimed that was for his spirit friends. And so we took the course, and he was teaching about different religions and how people understand what the spirit is, what the soul is all about. And so it was a comparison and a contrast, And years later, I found out that he was an absolutely well-known exorcist.
I thought you were going to say he was a ghost.
No, but you know what? There was a quality about him. He was a fascinating.
He was an exorcist.
He was.
Interesting.
Absolutely, he was. And I read about him later on. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get in any trouble, but...
Father Timothy Johnson, right?
No, sir. But he... his stories were fascinating. And he told of houses that he went to that had very dark spirits, that he had to bless the house and bless the people. And he was talking about psychic energy. And he said certain categories of people generate enough personal psychic energy to help these spirits, these disembodied spirits, manifest themselves. And so that's very different from just biblical teachings and biblical tradition. But there are many, many people who make use of clergy to bless houses that have had some scary thing happen, something that isn't good, to get that dark energy out of the house and to protect the people that are living in those houses. And I think if we say that the soul lives on, the spirit lives on after the body withers, then we have to assume that there may be states where it is not at rest.
So here's my big question. Okay, I'm getting frazzled now. My big question
Ooh,
is...
you're scared.
He's getting haunted.
So there's
what is
possession?
that misty thing?
He's getting haunted.
But an exorcism is for a demon, right? Not a ghost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
But they are
But
disembodied
what's the
spirits.
difference between a ghost, which is some sort of spirit thing, and a demon, which would be some sort of spirit thing?
I think
Now I've got a big question about ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they have clothes on?
Just a bed sheet.
No, I think wouldn't it be like you say, an electromagnetic perception?
And I think that comes back to
light. If every creature, if energy is light, then it can present itself.
No,
couldn't it?
I've had ghostly encounters, and my encounters have been like you'll see something move and you'll be like, but my experience has been that my first reaction isn't, oh, that's a ghost. It's like, why did that door do that? That's weird. And then when you can't explain it any other way, it kind of creeps you out. But I've also seen things and thought, well, why is this little girl in this hallway here at 3 a.m.? That's weird. Nobody's supposed to be around.
Well, there's the hotel story, too.
Oh, yeah. A hotel in Scotland.
Yeah.
We were staying in this hotel, and it was a winter season, and we had rented one room, and it had 3 beds in it, and it turned out they were 3 single beds. So Dave took one bed, I took the middle bed, and then we put our 2 boys, they were young, in the 3rd bed. And in the night, I woke up, and I saw the older of the 2 boys walk into the bathroom, an attached room. And being a mom, I waited a little while. I thought, I wonder if he's sick. He was in there a while. And then finally I got up because I didn't perceive him coming out of there. I got up and I said, are you all right? And
You went up to the bathroom? You got up?
near over by their bed, to the foot of their bed, the boys' bed. I said, are you all right? And I said my son's name. And he goes, Mom. He goes, what are you doing? Go back to bed. I said, didn't you just go into the bathroom? He said, no. He said, no, I haven't been up at all. I said, are you sure? He said, no, I haven't been up, Mom. He goes, get some sleep. I'm fine. We're fine. So I went and lay back down. And then later, Dave saw some child standing over me, looking down at me.
See, now that just gave me chills again.
Oh, it was spooky. It was very spooky. And that place was full of energy. You would be in that hotel, and we were there for an extended stay, and you would be in that hotel, and all of a sudden you would hear children laughing and fooling around. And it was a repeated thing in the building. And so I used to go to the foot of the steps and use my mother voice and say, okay, all of you stop now. I want you to come off the steps. Somebody's going to fall. Somebody's going to get hurt. That's enough. And then it would stop. But it was for all the world like living children, goofing off on the steps. And, as a parent or as anybody that's looking out for little kids, it puts your hackles up. And that was routine. And that little girl, ghost, and that's all I can tell you, was seen often. One night we were there, and there was an attached pub to this place. And there was a visitor who happened to be from Australia. And she was the epitome of the party mindset. This gal exuded joy and fun and carefree attitude and all of that. And it was very late. And everybody needed to go home. It was time to close up, and that was in the process of happening. And she came out and she asked Dave, and there was a couple other people that were there. She said, you're not by any chance walking across the river, because that's where she had come from. She was staying across the river.
This is in Scotland?
This is in Scotland. You're not walking across the river, are you? And he said, no, but I can. And there were other people there. They said, yeah, we can go that way. And she said, because I'm very afraid. What are you afraid of? She said, I just saw the ghost of a little girl down the hallway.
Well, she didn't actually say that until we were up at the castle.
Right.
So it was just her. And I felt a little awkward, like walking her. It's like a very dark path.
She didn't want to talk about it?
Very misty.
She didn't really want to talk about it, seems like?
Well, here's what it was. So I ended up saying, I'm going to walk her back over, because she stayed later than some of her friends and all that. So she would have had to walk back alone all the way up there.
And that was
That castle is what they call a modern castle. But they have, every castle in Scotland's got a story about being haunted and all that sort of thing. We never really witnessed it ourselves there. But anyway, so we got saying about something about how the castle had all these stories about being haunted and all that. I said, but then she said, well, I've been there a couple nights. She says, I haven't detected anything at all. She said, but you have a ghost at the hotel down there, what we just came from. I said, what do you mean? She said, there's a little girl by the bathrooms. And she said maybe 10 or 11. And it looked like in, sort of old style clothing. And I said, well, that gave me a shiver because I thought, you know what, we've heard that story from other people, including somebody who claimed to be a medium that time.
Oh, yeah.
That we had run into, and she had been to the same hotel. And said, oh, yeah, there's a lot of activity at that hotel.
There were 2 ghosts. The hotel was very old. It used to be a sheep drover's hotel. And they would draw, the sheep were, as lambs, were released up into the upper highlands. And they would survive out there, on the heather and out in the wind-blown moors and on the mountainsides. And they would then be rounded up and driven, and I don't mean by car or truck or anything like that. They would be herded down south. They would take them down to England where they would be sold. Or sometimes they would be sold near to where we stayed. They had like a big auction. And so the lowlanders would buy these Scottish sheep from out on the moors and the hillsides, because as soon as they got those sheep back down to England and they didn't have to rough it like they were in Scotland, then they would fatten right up, and the quality of the wool was absolutely wonderful. So when you see these Aran knits and some of these other Scottish knits, the real wool sweaters, that is beautiful quality, because they still raise sheep up there. I mean, there was a time that there were people, they were farming on a lot of these crofts up there, and you've heard probably of the Highland clearances, that they wanted to get rid of the people in the little farms there because there was way more money in the raising of sheep.
Is that near Argyll?
So up that way. Argyll is a little further south than what we're talking about in the Highlands. But this hotel had 2 like low stone walls, and the drovers would come in there and they would store their sheep out in these big stone pens, and then they'd stay overnight or a night and then get back on the road the following day and continue driving.
So these were hotels
herds.
they're kind of built with them in mind.
With them in mind. Okay. Spaced out like a reasonable day's walk, driving these sheep south. And so a lot of people at that hotel that we were staying at said that they saw the ghost of a woman, a middle-aged woman, and who was wearing a gray dress, the type of thing that a servant might wear, long dress with a white apron. And many of the young people that worked at that hotel at various points talked about seeing her, but not directly. They didn't see her like directly face on. They would see her out of the corner of their eye. They would see her, or many times, many of them reported seeing her as a reflection in the glass of the TV set that was in some of the bedrooms.
Oh, one of those things where you're seeing your reflection in the TV that's maybe turned off or something, and then there's an image behind you. You notice?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing.
Lots of things like that. We had, at that time when we were there, one young man, he was a musician, rock musician, and very cool is I guess a good word to describe him. Very clued up, very cool. And he was going on, I don't believe any of that nonsense. And he used other words, a little bit spicier words than I'm using. And I don't believe that for a second, blah, blah, blah.
He came down the next morning and...
Yeah.
He said, "Zoinks!"
Zoinks!
Something like that.
Like,
Yeah.
let's get out of here.
He said that the lights kept turning on and off. And I'm wondering if he didn't think that somebody downstairs was doing that just to tease him, but I assure you they were not.
I did some ghost hunting, and I was going to do a show in Orlando years ago too, where you staked out places. This is before all the ghost hunting shows and all that stuff. But there was I think in upstate New York, there was a family that had a house they were either renting or buying from somebody, and the person who had the house before them was a widower, and he was an author and stuff, and so his wife had died, and he died in that house.
Okay.
And so the mother and father were in their bedroom, and they had like maybe a 6-year-old son in another room, and he kept they had a piano downstairs. They would hear that play all the time. They'd hear weird things, and the little boy came into the parents' bedroom one night and said, "He doesn't want us here anymore." And
That's me. I'm gone.
so we had them had them in the living room where the living people go, and we set up some mics and infrared cameras and stuff, and we
Way ahead of your time.
this was back in the 90s, I think,
Cool.
when I was like 6 or 7 myself. And
Sure.
What does a 6 or 7-year-old get a hold of all that equipment?
He was
But they-
precocious even then.
well, they had one of these big basements, and we weren't really getting much. Like, we would hear noises, and it turned out to be like an old timey iron radiator and stuff like that. So I would go into the basement in the dark, and I was heckling the ghost and calling him out, calling him a coward, and goofy things like that. And then above me, which was the kitchen, I heard that sounds like a slap, but it was supposed to be a thump. Thump.
Sounded pretty thumpy.
Yeah, so there was a big thump above me.
Right
and
above your head?
Yeah. And it sounded like a big trunk being dragged across the floor. And I ran upstairs and there was nothing there. So that convinced me. And I've seen and heard things in Hollywood, working late nights at Hollywood, where in Hollywood, California, not Hollywood, Florida, that it's like a lot of what you're saying is basically, until you encounter an alien yourself, you won't believe in them. But once you do, you will not be able to unbelieve them.
Well, that's it. And I
In
think
them.
so much of that sort of
That's
thing
right.
is experiential. I think our time is gone.
Well, we'll have to have another episode then,
All right.
because
I think this is part
I needed
one.
to talk more about the EVPs and my,
I have
my
other
theory.
stories. Mm-hmm. I have other stories. Okay, this is part one. How about next Friday? Can we pick this up where we're leaving off?
Or if not before, yeah. And
No, we have to save it for Friday. Otherwise, we're not freaky enough.
yeah, that's true. I suppose that's true.
Was this
But-
episode freaky enough?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm always freaked out by that stuff.
But yeah, the just as a quick tease, the EVP thing. I think there are some physics to support the fact that that could actually be happening.
Okay.
And I believe ghosts aren't spirits. I think they're time travelers.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, all right.
I
Well,
will-
we have a lot to chew on between now and then. Count your blessings, everyone, and have a wonderful holiday weekend. Bye now.